And hello, Recovery fam. And it is another episode of the Unashamed Recovery Podcast with the awesome and amazing Josh and Drew. That's Drew over there.
Right here.
And I'm Josh. Here at the Unashamed Recovery Podcast, we believe that there is healing in the story of our scars and that it is okay to not be okay.
It is our sole mission to break the shame and stigma of addiction and recovery by sharing real stories of real addiction from real people and real recovery and real sobriety.
That's right. And so let's just go ahead and get this out of the way as we, at the very beginning, we will not have video companions to our episodes anymore. We may in future seasons, but as of right now, we're not. Our good friend, the Mad Russian, who was behind the scenes and was taking care of us, he has left the show. He had a lot of stuff going on with family and work, and he couldn't really make that blend well, and so he has departed. We wish him well. We love him, but he was the mastermind behind the video, and without him, we're just going to tackle giving y'all the best audio that we can. So with that being said, today, this episode should find you at around the 1st of September, which means we've got one more episode after this, and we have our season finale. And as we break for our season finale, that will be in October, we usually come back in November, but this year we're not. We're going to take an extended break, and season 4 will launch in March of 2023. So now, all that's out of the way, let's get on to it.
Unashamed, the Recovery Podcast.
Today is not really a testimony, but we have a guest here with us who is going to talk some awesome. I really don't know. I don't think it's recovery.
I mean,
it's recovery.
I think it's still recovery. It's still
recovery.
Pieces of recovery as far as digging a little bit deeper.
Yeah, it's another side.
I think we hit more of the surface level stuff, and this is kind of getting to the roots of some things.
Most definitely.
So
today's guest is a speaker. She's the founder of the Mississippi Harm Reduction Initiative, and she is the director of outreach for End It for Good. And our guest today is Angela Mallette. And I said that right,
Hello.
correct?
Yeah, you did.
Chalk one up for me. How about that? I got somebody's name right.
I was about to say it. I was about to say it. At least she didn't call her Katie.
So, with our guest today, we're getting another side of recovery for Mississippi. This is going to be a side that we don't get into a lot, but it goes back into our season 1 where we talked about different paths to recovery. This is another option, but End It for Good. Angela, tell us a little bit about it. What is End It for Good up to? What are y'all doing?
Oh, well, we're just all over the place. So this will be a recovery story.
Awesome.
We're gonna talk about how I ended up in recovery and why I do the work that I do today. So End It for Good is a Mississippi-based nonprofit who works on educating and advocacy for changing the way that we respond to drugs in our communities. So we travel all over the state. We work on advocacy with the state capitol, trying to educate leaders, stakeholders, communities, parents, and people in recovery on the harms that come from criminal approaches to people who use drugs. And we can dive into that as much as you guys want to. So if you zoom out like 50,000 feet and kind of look down at this whole entire issue of drugs and all the policies surrounding them, you see that almost all of the harms that come from drugs into communities, into our states, into our country, is because of the policies that we have. Everyone thinks we were all taught. We all look like we're about the same age, right? We're 80s babies.
Yep, definitely.
Yeah. So
except for this young one right here.
80s baby.
How old are you, Josh?
89 does not count.
88. Get it right.
Oh, he's a youngin'.
I'm 34. I still count.
Still a baby.
Don't let the gray fool you. I'm young at heart.
So, we're all products of this war on drugs.
Dare.
Just say no, dare. Yeah.
Yep.
And we were taught that all of the harms and bad things that happen if you use drugs is because of the substance itself. Like
Right.
the substance is the demon. And all of us sitting here at this table had to reckon with that.
Yep.
Right? Was it the drugs that messed your life up?
Absolutely not. It was
True.
the trauma.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Josh, was it the
Well,
behavior?
It's interesting because mine is not drugs.
Right, yours is a behavioral
Yes,
addiction.
yes. So I'm different. I'm the oddball because mine is more so habit. Like
Yeah.
there wasn't trauma. Mine was just born out of necessity and opportunity and habit.
But so
So-
if you dig into that, though, and I've heard your story 1,000 times.
No, not my story.
Oh yes, we've traveled all over the state listening to Josh's stories. No, but in a seriousness, if you think about it, yeah, yours does involve some trauma, but you don't realize it because it's been masked to make you feel like it's just a behavioral thing, just kind of like with drugs, everybody thinks it's just a substance thing. You know what I mean? But like if you really dig down into it, you said your grandfather, introduced you to porn. That's traumatic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? We don't see it as traumatic because it's so culturally passive.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And
Like
trauma's the word trauma has such a serious connotation to
Yeah.
it. I don't know if you guys knew Shane Gerard. Shane Gerard was the director of Fairland Treatment Center up in Clarksdale for many, many years, and then he became the director of addiction service or behavioral and addiction services at Department of Mental Health. And then we lost Shane last year to cancer. But Shane is just a giant in recovery in our state. And Shane taught me a lot about trauma. And he used to tell me, he was like, let's not really call it trauma. Let's call it our belief systems, right? So your belief systems, whatever it is, whether it's about sex or it's about rejection or it's about fear or it's about relationships, your belief systems are set in childhood, and these experiences that you have can skew them and make your coping skills maladaptive. So
Yeah.
it really all roots in some kind of trauma or some kind of core belief system that is established when we're really young.
So who does that sound like? Amy?
Yep.
Oh,
And some of the
we
stuff
have a
I've tried
great
to teach you.
episode that goes deeper into stuff. It's actually the first episode of this season, which is Choice or Disease with Amy Brogan from
I
Jacob's Well.
listened to some of it, not all
That's
of it.
a really she takes a deep dive in. Anyway, we're getting
As far
Yeah,
as
so
far
we're-
as belief systems, yeah.
yes.
I can talk about trauma.
Yeah.
Y'all, I can have like a whole episode to talk about trauma. But today we're talking about End It for Good and,
Yes, End
and
It for Good.
policy.
So I want to ask right quick.
Okay.
Because I know people are going to want to know this. So y'all are a Mississippi-based nonprofit.
Mm-hmm.
What is End It for Good? Like, just for the viewers, what are y'all doing for the Mississippi recovery community?
So we are actively working on educating communities on harm reduction programs, but we're also advocating for safer laws for the people in recovery in Mississippi.
That's awesome.
And fighting against harmful ones.
Right.
Yeah.
When you're working in advocacy, at first I thought like, oh, well, we're just going to advocate for bills that will help people, right? We're going to try to pass laws. We're going to try to advocate for additional funding, trying to get resources for all kinds of things, for sober living, for more treatment, for naloxone, for fentanyl testing strips. But I learned like there's this whole other side to it. It's like it's almost a full-time job just to fight against the bad stuff
Well, I can imagine.
that people try to pass.
Yeah.
And so we do that, and then we host lots of events. End It for Good allows me to really dive into grassroots organizing for people in recovery.
Man, that's awesome. So, speaking on that, I already heard a secret that you were a graduate of Ole Miss.
Yeah.
And you were an engineer.
Drew doesn't like it, but y'all, he's still being nice to me, so I'll take it.
As Mississippi State fans, me and Drew were going to.
We're very hospitable.
But
Still.
I also heard another secret. I heard that you were appointed on the governor's opioid task force. Is that correct?
Well, I worked for the governor's opioid and heroin
Gotcha.
task force. So the original.
Well, that's partly right.
Yeah, the original. So this was 2017 under Governor Phil Bryant, and he assembled the first opioid and heroin task force to try to look at like what can we do surrounding this opioid crisis. It was about 2016, 17 that we started to see a huge spike in overdose deaths in Mississippi, and so this task force was put together. Well, simultaneously, Mississippi received the first opioid grant from SAMHSA.
Oh, okay.
And so that was $7 million the first year, then in 14, and then now we're on like year 4, I think. And it's just continuous funding that's coming down from the feds that will help pay for medication for people, help pay for people to go to residential treatment for IOP,
Awesome.
and also the state Narcan distribution program. So anyway, 2017, I was lucky enough to get hired as the outreach director for this opioid initiative.
Yeah.
And so the members of that task force and myself, we spent about 2 years together traveling around the state, hosting town hall meetings in every major city in the state. We did one here in Meridian. We've done them all over the place.
Awesome.
That's awesome.
So I worked for that task force. I wasn't on it.
Got you. Well, let's backpedal because
Okay.
I'm very, very curious as to know your story because I want to know how a engineer graduate from Ole Miss winds up as a leading forefront of the recovery community for Mississippi. So let's backpedal.
Okay.
Let's take us back. Give us a couple minutes of Angela's story. Like,
Yeah.
that engineer. Like, I really want to know this one. This one's got me.
All right.
And
So
wiggling in your seat a little
Yes.
bit. Yeah.
Yes, I'm excited.
there you go. All right. So let's take a ride.
Yeah.
Let's take a ride down to South Mississippi on the Gulf Coast. I was born in a sleepy little coastal community off of Fort Bayou in Jackson County, Mississippi. And I grew up there, and all of my family was there. I had a really big, really huge family, and so lots of cousins, lots of aunts and uncles, and my parents. I'm the oldest of 3 girls, and now our family, my mother and my stepfather, there are 6 kids, 5 girls and 1 brother. Y'all can feel sorry for him later, and and so I had. By all means and measures, a pretty normal childhood. I was the oldest of my sisters, so I was around through my parents' divorce, and that was rocky a little bit. But I held it together, and I was always a good student. I was academically inclined. Always made straight A's. I learned very early.
I'm sorry, don't mean to interrupt, but that makes like every guest that we've had.
Every guest says that.
Every guest. Because it was a masking tool.
It was. So that's the thing,
to
right?
be as successful as you could. And remember, like I think we talked about it when I told my story about how you try to be as successful as you can at your other part of life while the other part's failing tremendously.
You know why? Because nobody's worried about the kid who's making straight A's on their report card and winning science fair projects and being elected class president. Nobody's looking at that kid going, what's hurting you? And so academic achievement was my coping skill from the time that I was 7, 8, all the way up through college, and that coping skill served me pretty well. So I got a scholarship to Ole Miss, and that's, so that focus on academic studies and overachieving at a young age served me pretty well. I went to Ole Miss, got a degree in civil engineering, and then I moved back to the coast and went to work for a private engineering firm. And my specialty was highway and bridge design. And I loved doing it. It was
So please go into why
yeah.
you went into bridges. What? We talked about this just a tiny little bit before the show. So so tell everybody what was the thing with the bridges?
So a friend told me a few weeks ago. She was laughing with me, and she said, Angela, it's almost like at a young age you heard God tell you that you needed to go build bridges, and you just took it literal. you went running straight towards an engineering degree and said, okay, let me go build some bridges. And, figured out the concrete and rebar and moment diagrams of how to actually build a structure. But that is not what I was supposed to be doing.
And then today you're building bridges with End It for Good. So.
Yes. Today I'm building bridges with End It for Good, but with just recovery people all over Mississippi. And
Mississippi has some of the best recovery communities. Like me and Drew have been very fortunate to kind of circle the state and visit these different recovery groups, and Mississippi has some of the finest recovery communities that I've been a part of. So it's awesome. So anyway,
I 1,000% agree.
Yeah,
it has been interesting to just kind of go across and be able to see like what each group does, and the life that people have now. It's just amazing to see turnaround story after turnaround story. So.
We'll have to get you guys down to the coast. Come down and visit
Didn't
us
you just
down
leave
there.
the coast?
Yeah, I'm heading back to the coast too.
Are you?
Yep.
So
we'll also come with our own band. So hey.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So so graduated college, moved back to the coast, I'm working. This was 2004 when I graduated from Ole Miss. 2005, we had a little storm blow up. So
Just a little storm.
Yeah. So Hurricane Katrina came in and blew up life as we knew it on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. And so I got to be involved with a lot of rebuilding projects after that. And that was great. I thought, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. So fast forward to about 5 years later, and I was in a relationship and I got pregnant for the first time, and I was 29 years old, and I thought, okay, so this is it. Now, let me pause here and say, because I haven't talked about drugs or alcohol, and they were very much a part of all of that story, but never a problem. I started drinking in high school to fit in, and I promise you I had my fair share of fun at Ole Miss. And, went to Mexico with friends. We had a lot of fun down there too, but never... nothing ever developed into a problem. It was always just like, okay, that was fun. That was an experience. I got to go study, or I gotta work. I got a project to work on next week. So up until that point, I'm not one of those people who just like the first time they tried something and it was just this tragic situation. But substance use, alcohol or drugs, was never a problem prior to this. So I was 29 and I got pregnant for the first time. And unfortunately, that pregnancy ended early, and they had to remove the baby, and I was prescribed pain medicine after that. And I just did not have the coping skills nor the understanding to deal with any of that.
Right.
All I knew is that I had just planned this whole future of becoming a mother, which is what I've always wanted. I went to college and got a good job and, did all those things because I wanted a family one day. And I thought I was about to have it. But that was not the plan that God had for me. But I did not have the skills to deal with any of it. I didn't know how to process grief. I didn't want to wrap my head around the fact that all my plans had just kind of come crushing down. And so I had a bottle of Oxycontin, and I took it for a few days to numb to get through the physical pain. But I kept taking it after that to numb a whole lot of emotional pain.
Yeah.
And so to me, I turned 30 while I was pregnant. And so I'm 30 now when this happens. And I just did a nosedive into a bottle of pain pills,
Right.
which consumed me, for the next 6 years of my life. And so very quickly, I hid it for a little while, but after I started IV use, I could not hide it anymore and really could not function. So I ended up losing my job, my home, all the things. Started going in and out of jail, all the things that come along with problematic substance use.
Right.
So I want to ask you a question right quick.
Okay.
At the beginning of season 2, we had a lady come on, Shauna, and she had a prescription. Was hers was opiates, wasn't it?
Yep.
Anyway, but she was doing prescription fraud because of that. But anyway, when we posted that episode, I did some deep dive into some statistics, and I saw a thing that said that I think it was 88% of people who were in full-blown opioid addiction started from a legitimate prescription. How accurate is that? Is that probably more now, or is that less? Or is that about right?
I don't know. I'd have to check that. And so my heartburn with that is it is too simplistic to just blame the prescription.
Right.
Right? It's too simplistic to just blame the doctor that wrote that prescription to me or to Shauna or to anybody else, right? Because they write prescriptions to people all the time. My dad has to take pain medicine for his back.
Right.
And he's not problematically using it, nor going to jail.
Yeah.
So for those of us who do, it's those of us who have some deep pain that we're trying to mask. So that statistic might be true, Josh. I'd have to go look it up. But what
it was one of those social media things I saw. So you can't take. So when I saw that, I was like, if that's true and if that's accurate, that's mind blowing. But anyway, that was one of those fact checkers hadn't checked that one. So.
Didn't block it out.
No.
Yeah.
Must be true.
So I was arrested for 2 felony charges: grand larceny, false pretense. One of them was dropped. And so I was court ordered to go to treatment. I went to treatment and then had a recurrence of use and went back after about 18 months. And I went back to treatment again. And I have been sober since then. It's almost, the end of the year will be 7 years.
Awesome. My
And
goodness.
so the happy end to that story is that God finally gave me that little baby girl that I had always wanted. Stella was born, and she is 7 years old.
Awesome.
And she's the real MVP. So they say, like, you can't get sober for someone, right? We all hear that. You can't get sober because somebody wants you to, or you can't do it to please someone. So I took that to heart, and I thought about it a lot. And like, I didn't get sober for Stella. I got sober because the most important thing to me, if I never do anything else on this earth, the most important thing to me is I want to be a good mother. And so didn't do it for her. I did it for me because that's what's important to me.
Yeah.
So it changed your belief system is what it did.
Yeah.
There was a token, to say the least, to change your belief system. So therefore you were emotionally involved at that point. So what happens, I think, a lot of times is people don't get emotionally involved in the recovery that they want. It's like people who say, I want to go on a diet. They'll diet for 2 weeks. Next thing you know, they're eating cake again because they're not emotionally involved. They're not emotionally invested in it. And that was something that gave you something to be emotionally invested in recovery.
Good stuff.
And so now, you've grown. It's kind of like whenever we start reading the Bible, you start being bottle fed, and then all of a sudden you get to the meat of it. So I think you're eating the steaks right now.
Yeah.
Because you're obviously that invested, and that was the catapult for it, was your daughter. So that's amazing.
That's beautiful, Drew. Thank you.
That's why I pay him the good money
That's
for comments
incredible.
like that. So,
so
was a part of your treatment, quotation marks, was that drug court, or was that not drug court?
Oh yeah, I'm a drug court graduate. And I'm a fan of drug courts. I think, so I believe in harm reduction.
Right.
I believe in multiple pathways to recovery. I believe that the most important thing that we need to focus on is keeping people alive. And
okay, so you just hit on it, and I want to break this down because we have a lot of people who are not recovery minded. We have a lot of people here. I did not know this, but we have a lot of people who listen who they're the parents of an addict.
Oh, yeah.
So for people who are not in the midst of this, what is harm reduction?
Okay, so if you Google harm reduction, you're going to see all kinds of stuff about it. But one of the primary definitions of harm reduction is reducing the risks associated with any inherently dangerous activity.
Right.
Okay? So we do this in lots of areas of our lives, and we don't even really think about it. So let's think about cars. So the first cars that were invented and sold to consumers in the United States was in 1899. The first car was sold in Detroit, and it had kerosene headlights.
Oh, geez.
No seatbelts. Nobody even knew what a blinker was, or like how to even make one. It was just like the free for all with cars, but everybody wanted one because you could get places so much faster.
Yeah.
And so motor vehicle fatalities skyrocketed over the next decade across the country. And our government was like, whoa, these things are really dangerous.
Right.
But I think this is here to stay with us. I don't know if there's any rolling back from this. So what are we going to do? So what happened was harm reduction responses to driving. So the first red light that was installed. So I'm an engineer, so this history stuff, like, I geek out on it. Don't make fun of me. So the first red light that was installed was in the United States, was in Cleveland, Ohio. If you're ever up there, you can go see it. And then, when I was pregnant with Stella, I spent weeks researching what's the safest car seat. And we have red lights now. We have backup cameras, lane sensors. Highways are designed, like the majority of designing a highway requires engineers like setting speed limits and setting ratios, lane widths, shoulder widths, the type of guardrails to put up, right? All of those are protective factors to reduce the risk of this inherently dangerous activity of driving.
Right.
We practice harm reduction in the automobile industry. We do it in the tobacco industry, right? So if you go look up old advertisements for tobacco, you can doctors were
they would give their support for cigarettes.
Yeah, they gave their support. Like these are most doctors smoke Camels.
Yeah.
I've seen that Camel advertisement. Women used to have babies and they push the baby out and they're like, "Oh, here, have a cigarette. It'll relax you." Like that's just crazy. Yeah. We would never do that now because we saw after decades that tobacco products are really harmful. But instead of criminalizing people who want to use them, we have initiated, as a country, harm reduction responses. So now there's free cessation clinics, there's patches, there's e-cigarettes, there's all kinds of less harmful ways for people who choose to use tobacco products, and you're not criminalized for it. So let's look at alcohol. Alcohol consumption is out there. It is also can be really deadly and is one of the main factors of lots of issues, domestic issues, personal issues, fatality issues in our country. But we also have a harm reduction response to alcohol. We have age restrictions on it. We have rules that say, you can't, if you're going to drink alcohol, you can't drive. And we have labeling on it to say, this is how potent it is. So we can take that same philosophy and apply it to substances. If you zoom all the way out, so if you're talking about drugs, you got to ask where the harm's coming from. When we talk about drugs and this war on drugs that the United States and really the rest of the world has followed our lead, if you look at war on drugs and ask where the harm's coming from, most of us are taught, because we're 80s babies, that all the harm comes from this one category of harms from drugs, like the substances themselves. And that's not really true. So if you look at this whole other category of harm that comes from criminalizing drugs, you see that the vast majority of the harm that's happening in our country and in our state and in our cities today comes from criminalizing these substances. And let me explain to you why. All right. So this is a little bit of economics 101, right? In any place in the world where something is being traded, you have three components. Now you have the market, that's the person who's manufacturing and selling the product. Then you have the commodity that's changing hands. We're going to call that the substance. And then you have the consumer. So you have market, substance, consumer. This is true if we're selling tomatoes or we're selling crack, right? So when you criminalize a market for a popular substance, you get some harms that come along with that. So let's look at the market for drugs and what happens when you criminalize it. So we saw this example play out about 100 years ago during alcohol prohibition, right? So in 1920, the Volstead Act was passed, and that brought in alcohol prohibition that said it's illegal to sell, manufacture alcohol anywhere in the United States. Almost immediately, literally within a year, you saw the alcohol market transfer from law-abiding businesses who'd once paid taxes and had quality control of this substance. It transferred underground because people didn't stop drinking.
Right.
Nobody wanted to quit drinking. Now they just got to buy it from a bootlegger. Right. So law-abiding businessmen closed their doors. Al Capone and his buddies are making millions.
Right.
Right. And all the violence and, Bloody Sunday that happened in Chicago, all of that comes along with it. And so when you criminalize a market of a popular substance, you drive it underground and you get violence. So the violence we see today in our communities is because not all of it, but all drug-related violence is really there because we have driven these substances underground,
right?
And people are fighting over them on the streets. All right, so that's what happens to a market. Now let's talk about what happens to the actual substance itself. So again, I'm going to throw back to the 1920s during alcohol prohibition. When alcohol was outlawed, you went from having quality controlled alcohol that was made in a brewery or a distillery and had a label on it. You went from having that to having bootleg, right? And you don't know what's in it.
It comes in from a free-for-all at that point. Yeah.
They cooked it up in the bathtub or out in the woods and radiators or whatever.
Right.
I used to watch that show Moonshiners. That's the only reason I know that. Right. So you lose absolutely all quality control and you get contamination.
Yeah.
So let's bring that forward to modern times. So today we have an opioid crisis, right? And our response has followed the same drug war mentality of crack down. So in 2013, the FDA began cracking down on the number of opioid prescriptions that could be written in this country. And almost overnight, you see overdose deaths from fentanyl just go through the roof, right?
Yep.
And Mississippi has followed the same suit. So in 2017, the Mississippi Medical Licensure Board enacted policies here because they were following the direction of the federal government. The feds said, limit number of prescriptions. So that's what they did. And as you can look, I have it charted out on a graph. You can look that as we begin to crack down on legal, safe, regulated opioid supply, the underground market, overdose deaths from illicit fentanyl just skyrocket. Right. So in the past 3 years, overdose deaths from fentanyl in Mississippi has increased by 83%.
That is insane.
While prescription numbers are going down. Okay.
Right.
So I'm telling you that because when you criminalize a substance, you drive it further underground and you lose quality control. So now it's contaminated and it's more potent by things like fentanyl.
Right.
So we criminalize the market, you get violence. You criminalize the substance, you get contamination, which is what fentanyl is. When you criminalize a consumer, let's talk about that. So when you respond to someone's substance use with incarceration, it starts this cycle, okay? And whatever it looks like, when you respond with incarceration, it is going to create disconnection in that person's life. Now, whether that's disconnection from their children, their job, their home, whatever, disconnection happens.
Right.
Now they have a criminal record. And that makes getting education, getting housing, getting employment really hard afterwards. All of those things are traumatic experiences.
So now you've driven that person underground at that point.
That's right. And Drew, what's the number one risk factor for addiction in the first place? Trauma.
Oh yeah, trauma. Definitely trauma.
Right. So we've created this system by responding to people with the criminal justice system. We've created this cycle that exacerbates the trauma and just like keeps it going.
That's what I was about to say. So I mean, now you've created a cycle of trauma because now when you cut people off like that, you know, and people don't get to see their kids, they don't have their free will, they don't have the freedom to even just go use the bathroom without somebody telling them.
Yep.
You know, now you've created an animalistic behavior. So people are going to go underground and become wildlings. Let's call them that.
Yeah.
You know, they're literally out in the woods just doing whatever.
Yeah.
Just to get by because they can't. Society doesn't accept them anymore. In a nutshell.
Yeah, and so all of these harms are coming from these systems, and we haven't even talked about the inequality and the way that this has impacted communities of color, right? Because right now in the United States, like, I don't remember the exact statistic. Oh, I think it's 12. But I was unsure if it was 12 or 8. But with the same laws, but they are enforced differently. So I think it's marijuana laws. You can look at marijuana laws. Research shows that white men and black men use cannabis at the same rates, right?
Okay.
Right. Actually, white men are a little bit higher in usage, but if you look at the arrest rates and incarceration rates for cannabis,
there's an extreme difference.
Yeah, there's an extreme difference. I can't remember if it's 12 or 8. So you need to go fact check me. I'll text you afterwards and
like
tell you the exact number.
Yeah, it is insane.
People of color have felt the brunt of these drug laws in our country more than anyone else. Right? So when you zoom all the way out and you see that all of this harm is coming from criminalizing and all of the contamination from fentanyl, that's a product of prohibition. The harder we crack down on legal, safer opioids, the more we drive people to an underground market where they're contaminated by fentanyl.
Yeah.
And
so I read an article, it's been a year ago, where there was another country, and don't quote me which country, because I can't remember. Portugal, yes. And you already know what I'm about to say.
Yeah.
They decriminalized and overnight the addiction. I mean, it was basically just wiped out. Like there was no more.
But it didn't wipe it out.
Well,
but it did massively decrease it. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. There. We need to hire her because she puts it way better than I put it.
Yeah. So Portugal did this crazy thing, y'all. All right. In 2001, Portugal had a heroin addiction rate that was 5 times what the United States is right now. I mean, it was terrible. Like over 1% of their population was injecting heroin on a daily basis. And their prime minister and all of the leaders in Portugal were like, our economy cannot sustain this.
Yeah.
We have to do something serious or we can't respond to it. We can't incarcerate enough people. Like our healthcare system can't treat the sickness that is coming from this.
Yeah.
So they brought together a team of scientists, of addiction professionals, criminal justice professionals, and they were like, what are we going to do? And Portugal in 2001 took the most drastic step of any country in the world, and they decriminalized possession of all drugs. And so what that is it is still illegal to manufacture. It's still illegal to traffic drugs. You can't just roll up in Portugal with a kilo of heroin. Right. You're going to jail. But they decriminalized the possession. So of those 3 categories of harm we were talking about earlier, the market, the substance, the consumer, they address that third category of harm, and that's harms to people who are using drugs.
Right.
So in Portugal now, if you are in possession of a substance, any substance, you are not arrested. But if you choose, they offer it to anyone. They say, okay, so we have this whole plethora of support services if you're ready for it. And in Portugal, if they almost have on-demand treatment.
Right.
You can get into treatment. Man. You can get into a medication-assisted therapy clinic like methadone or buprenorphine, or I don't know if they're doing psychedelics in Portugal, but there's a whole array. They have assisted living. They have sober living. And what I think is really cool is they created this massive program of job expansion for people who are struggling with addiction.
That's amazing.
So,
that is amazing.
So let's say you used to be a welder, right? And for whatever reason, life got hard for you. You developed a problem with opioids and you need to go to treatment. So you go, right? Because in Portugal, you can access it really easily. You go and you get out. The government has a job incentive. So they will go to an employer and say, if you employ this guy for a year, we'll pay half his wages.
Man.
And so the purpose of this.
Do you understand how different that would be for like even just the state of Mississippi itself? You know, I mean,
man, that's huge.
So the whole purpose of that was to make sure that people like us who have experienced some pain and addiction have something to wake up for in the morning and look forward to.
Yeah. Right.
To rebuild a life that you don't need to escape from anymore. And so it's worked in Portugal. It's been 20 years now, and their injection drug use rates are down by 60%.
Oh, goodness.
Their addiction rates are massively down. And also, their crimes in the whole country, their crime rates are also massively down. Because if you think about it,
nobody's fighting over this stuff anymore.
Nobody's fighting over it anymore. You're not having to steal and hide your addiction. Like, you can get help if you need it. So these property crimes that were related to drug use, they're all going down.
Well, the fact of the matter is, I mean, when you look at it, nobody's having to, steal for a way of living. They're not having to, take what somebody else has just to support themselves anymore. So, because now they have all these, the job incentives and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that's amazing to me. That's phenomenal.
So what would it take to get that here in the United States, or let's bring it more closer home, what would you like to bring that to Mississippi? What would it take?
Well,
because that right there's that's a case study for how it works. I mean, it works.
It worked. Yeah. So it's been 20 years. Portugal did a referendum where they asked the entire country to vote. They did it in 2016, and they said, okay, do you want to go back to the old way of criminalizing drug use? And like 90% of the country said no. We like it the way that it is now. Yeah. Things are much better. So in the United States, what does that look like? So Oregon just did it. Oregon in 2020, so the COVID consuming our lives kind of covered up this, but the state of Oregon decriminalized drugs in 2020. And they are now going to, so what I did not mention about Portugal, and let me throw it in here, this only worked, decriminalization only worked in Portugal because they shifted their budgets. So in Portugal, they spend, of all of their drug intervention dollars, okay, so when I say drug intervention dollars, I mean everything under the umbrella of treatment, incarceration, border patrol, prosecution, all that stuff is drug intervention dollars. In Portugal, they spend 90% of it on prevention and treatment, and they spend 10% on enforcement. So in the United States today, we do the exact opposite.
Yep.
Of all the taxpayer dollars that go towards drug intervention, we spend 90% of it on enforcement.
Yep. And building more prisons.
Prison,
trying to lock more people away.
Yep. Border Patrol, all the stuff, Coast Guard, all that stuff. And treatment, treatment and prevention in the United States only gets 10% of that. All right, so
that should be upside down the other way.
I agree with you. So just imagine what it would look like if it's just 50-50.
Yeah, 50-50 would.
Because, I mean, it almost didn't even sound like a war on drugs over here. It more sounds like a war on people. You know what I'm saying? That's what it really sounds like to me. when you really kind of like take a step back, I mean, I'm not going to say I'm a victim of it, but, I was a person that ended up incarcerated because of possession.
Yeah.
Granted, that was 2 years of my life just out of the door. And when I look back now, I mean, if I'd have had something to look forward to whenever I got out, it would have been a lot different. Of course, the last time I went in, of course, I had to change my mindset because I had, the catalyst for something to boost. And I was invested in my recovery because I had things that I wanted to do and I wanted to live differently. But, that's
purpose.
But, everybody doesn't have that purpose. Everybody gets overwhelmed by the trauma. They don't have these programs, to suffice them, to sufficiently help them build a life anymore. They're coming about, but at what rate? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Oregon just did it. They are going to be shifting the way that they allocate their resources in Oregon to make treatment widely accessible for people, fund recovery community organizations. Like they're doing all kinds of stuff. So it's new. We're going to see, I think Oregon had COVID happen, right? So COVID just kind of derailed everything.
Right.
But there was a period of time in Oregon where they have to build these services out. Right. So we can go over to the Capitol right now and the governor could say, here's X number of $1 million for treatment. Well, you got to go build the treatment center. Right.
You got to have the people to work the treatment
right.
facility.
So Oregon,
maybe if they stop building the prisons.
So Oregon's building out their resources right now. And I think we're going to see everyone in the country is watching what's going to happen in Oregon over the next 4 or 5 years. So
right.
Yeah.
Big policy changes like this, like decriminalization or legal regulation, we're decades away from that. To answer your original question, you said, what's it going to take? We're decades away from that happening. I hope, and all of us at End It for Good are going to be working with people all over the country and moving in that direction. But what I want to know, Josh, is how do I stop going to funerals now in Mississippi?
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what I want to know. What do I have to do to stop burying my friends and the people that I love?
Yeah. That's the question, ain't it? That's
So we can wait around while everybody watches Oregon and the people in D.C. fuss about it and fight about it and they get on Fox News and we can wait around on that. But I want to know how to stop going to funerals now.
Right.
And that was like when we did the choice or disease episode, at the end, I closed it out with, hey, whatever side you're on, whether you think that addiction is choice or if it's disease, whatever choice you're on, while you're arguing about it, people are still dying from addiction.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't, like you argue, it doesn't hide the fact that we're losing all these people per year.
And so I really don't even get into the conversation anymore about disease or choice.
Right.
I mean, I've heard great arguments for both. I know the DSM-5 says it's a disease, but I've heard great arguments for either. And honestly, that's not worth talking about to me.
In the end, it makes it a little obsolete.
Can we just all agree that
there's a problem?
It shouldn't be criminalized.
Yeah.
What addiction is, a choice or disease, I don't care. Can we all just agree that you shouldn't be criminalized for it? You should be helped.
Yes.
Like we should do some serious trauma therapy.
Right.
That's what you need. You don't need to be sitting in jail. So what do we do right now while these big policy changes are coming to fruition in our country? In the right now, I believe the answer is harm reduction. And harm reduction can look like a lot of things. So there are programs and harm reduction responses for people. So things like Narcan, right? Narcan can keep people alive.
Yes.
In the area, in the world of fentanyl that we have right now, whether you're a meth user, a cocaine user, or an opiate user, and that doesn't matter because fentanyl's in all of it.
Right.
Right. All people who are using drugs, like you got to have Narcan around. Parents, you got to have it. If you don't have it, call me and we will get it for you. The Department of Mental Health supplies it and to grant-funded organizations. They supply it to community mental health centers. Call me. We'll get it for you. Fentanyl testing strips are really important. Fentanyl testing strips are just little slivers of paper. They're like, 10 cents
Yeah.
a piece, and
Like
you
the
can
little lithium
test.
paper.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
can test if fentanyl is in the substance that you're about to consume, right? And that's for people who are like way far down the spectrum who are using every day. Dude, but it's also for these college kids at State who are like thinking they're getting an Adderall from their buddy. And really, it's a pressed pill with fentanyl in it. Like, I don't want people using drugs, but I don't want you to die either. And let's
Right.
just be practical.
Yeah.
They're going to do it. So don't we want them
But
to
be
be
smart
safe?
about
So
it,
I
right?
want your opinion on this. And this kind of goes into what we were just talking about. And we got to wrap it up because we're way over time frame. Man, I could go about this. But anyway, I've seen where clean, or that might be the word, but anyway.
Clean syringes.
No,
Yeah.
a clean use site.
Oh,
or
yeah, safe.
Safe clean site or safe
So,
use site?
so some people call them safe injection sites, or you might hear them called safe consumption sites.
Yes, that's it.
Because you can really use any substance there. It doesn't have to be just injected.
Yeah.
If you
Right.
smoke, whatever, you
So-
can use it there.
With your stance on harm reduction,
Mm-hmm.
where does that play in?
Yeah, so safe consumption sites are a really powerful form of harm reduction. They are, so I can tell you a stat, and you can fact check this one because I know it. There are 134 safe consumption sites in the world as of last year.
Okay.
Right, so places like Switzerland, the UK, all over Canada, South America, they have safe consumption sites, safe injection sites. And in those 134 safe injection sites, there has yet to be not one single fatal overdose.
Man.
So people don't die when they're medically supervised. Right.
That's a
So as a
huge difference.
Yeah. So there are 2 in the United States right now. There's a big court battle about one that tried to open in Philadelphia. Supreme Court ruled that they could. So there's one in Philadelphia, and then there's also one in New York City. And there has yet to be a fatal overdose. People have overdosed there, but they have medical staff there to revive them, so
Right.
they don't die.
So, and I hear a lot of people talking negatively about these sites, and I think we have to shift our mindset from this a moral failing / criminalization. I mean, people go all the time and get drunk at a bar,
Same
and that is
thing.
a clean,
It's
safe
consumption
environment for them
site.
for them to do so. I think it's just people are caught up in tradition, and we're still looking at this from a moral failing and a criminalization aspect of it. So, okay, I wanted your take on that because
Yeah.
this is something that's new. We haven't seen that here in Mississippi
No,
yet.
and I don't know that we will.
No, I don't think so either.
Not anytime soon,
Yeah.
and that's okay. Harm reduction in Mississippi looks like we have widely available access to naloxone. We hope to be able to have it with fentanyl testing strips soon. There's conversations about syringe exchange programs because syringe exchange programs widely decrease communicable diseases like HIV and hepatitis. And, the purpose of programs like this, whether it's clean syringes or fentanyl testing strips, it's not really about, I know for people who just hear this, they're like, oh my gosh, you're enabling their drug use? You're going to give somebody a syringe so they can keep shooting up? Like, well, they're going to do it anyway. So do you want them to do it safely so they don't get an infectious disease or a bloodborne disease, or do you want them to take the risk?
Right.
But the purpose is not really the use. Like, the purpose with programs like this is for a non-judgmental touch with someone who at every single time I'm giving you a dose of Narcan, every single time that you're coming to get a fentanyl testing strip, and if one day we ever have syringe exchange programs like other states do, every time a person comes to that, at any given time, they can say, hey, Josh, thank you for giving me these syringes, but today I'm done. Can you help me? And
You're right.
that's the moment we're waiting on,
Yeah.
right? It's not about giving them the supplies. It's building enough trust with someone if you take somebody who's in the midst of active addiction, I don't know about you guys, but for me, when I was in it, the only thing that I carried around with me on a daily basis, nonstop, was shame.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
It was
Most definitely.
my sad companion all the time, right? And so when
Guilt rode with me sometimes too.
guilt hung out a few times, but guilt is just a stupid first cousin of shame.
Right.
So people who are in the midst of active problematic drug use, like that's their companion is shame. And so when they can encounter someone who's going to be nice to them and not judge them for the struggle that they're going through right now, they're far more likely to come back and say, hey, I'm done today. Can you help me?
Right.
That's the magic of these kinds of programs, and that's the magic of harm reduction. So
because you're kind of building that relationship with that person, and they know, hey, this is kind of a safe place, and they know that that help is available when they're continuing to visit that place for that. So, well, we could sit here for another hour, and we could talk more. And I know you probably have more that you would like to say. And who knows, we would love to have you back on season 4.
Definitely.
we can do that.
And so, but with that, for anybody out there who's listening who may have a question, or maybe they want to get it with you about the Narcan, or maybe they want you to come and speak at their recovery group, or we have a network of other recovery podcasts, and maybe they want to get you onto their show. What is a good email for somebody to give you an email at?
It is Angela at enditforgood.com. enditforgood.com.
That is awesome.
Or you can hit me up on Facebook. Angela Mallette. I'm out there. I'm outside.
Email. She's out there. So,
Out there.
guys, with that, that's all the time we've got for the day. We appreciate y'all listening and for your continued support of the show. If y'all have any questions for us, maybe you have some recommendations for a guest or a topic, or maybe you want to tell us how good or how bad we're doing, either way, you can reach us at unashamedpodcast@yahoo.com. And that's not to be confused with Phil and Jace Robertson's podcast, Unashamed. We're Unashamed Recovery. So anyway, unashamedpodcast@yahoo.com. Guys, until next time, we love y'all, and remember to be unashamed.
Stay sober, guys.